The Wyoming House of Representatives will please come to order. Good morning, members. Welcome to your 24th day of the 66th Wyoming Legislature General Session. I'm surveying the chamber to see if we have a committee or two out. Let's go ahead and call the roll.
Convening roll for the 24th day, Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021. Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Littner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Henner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stiff. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zwanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Crago. Nicholas. Walters. Nicholas. $59 present, 1 excused.
Thank you very much. Members, if you would join Reverend Rick Veit from St. Mark's Episcopal Church for our morning prayer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I'll offer an amended version of the collect actually for the armed forces, and I've applied it to our setting today. And also as we remember those who are suffering just south of us, of course, in Boulder. Let us pray. Almighty God, we commend to your gracious care and keeping all of those throughout this nation and in Wyoming, and especially in this House of Representatives. On this day, we especially remember all of those who were hurt or who died yesterday in Boulder. We pray for their grieving families and their friends. Defend us day by day, Lord. with your heavenly grace. Strengthen us in our trials, our temptations. Give us courage to face the perils which beset us. And most importantly, grant us a sense of your abiding presence wherever we may be. It is through your one and holy name that we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Veit. We appreciate you again today being with us and look forward to tomorrow. Thank you. Journal Committee report.
Your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of March 22nd, 2021 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Representatives Harrelson and Provenza.
Reports from standing committees.
Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 1 Judiciary, to whom was referred Senate File 87 engrossed voyeurism amendments, respectful report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Crago, Larson Dan, Oakley, Olson, Provenza, Rodriguez Williams, Washit, Yen, Swanitzer. Representative Olson, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 1 Judiciary, to whom was referred Senate File 155 engrossed, limiting firearm seizure and regulation during emergencies, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Crago, Larson Dan, Oakley, Olson, Rodriguez Williams, Washit, Swanitzer. Noes, Representative Yin. Excused, Representative Provenza. Representative Olson, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 4 Education, to whom was referred Senate File 79 engrossed, Medicaid billing for school-based services, respectful report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Andrew, Brown, Connolly, Harshman, Nyman, Newsom, Obermueller, Paxton, Summers. Representative Paxton, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 4 Education, to whom was referred Senate File 108, Career and Technical Education Terminology, respectful report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Andrew, Brown, Connolly, Harshman, Nyman, Newsom, Obermueller, Paxton, Summers. Representative Paxton, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 4 Education, to whom was referred Senate File 115 engrossed, Education Pupil Teacher Contact Time, respectfully report same back to the House with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Andrew, Brown, Connolly, Harshman, Nyman, Newsom, Obermueller, Paxton, Summers. Representative Paxton, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom was referred Senate File 36 engrossed, for profit public benefit corporations, respectful report same back to the House with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Blackburn, Clifford, Duncan, Air, McGuire, Roscoe, Swanitzer. Noes, Representatives Clausen and Hunt. Representative Swanitzer, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom is referred Senate File 62 engrossed, repealing sunset date for the Office of Consumer Advocate. Respectful report same back to the House with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Clausen, Clifford, Duncan, Air, McGuire, Roscoe, Swanitzer. Noes, Representatives Blackburn, Hunt. Representative Swanitzer, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 9, Minerals, Business, and Economic Development, to whom was referred Senate File 40, Wyoming Money Transmitters Act Amendments. Respectful report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Bear, Burkhart, Duncan, Air, Greer, Heiner, Sherwood, Western. Noes, Representative Gray. Representative Greer, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 9, Minerals, Business, and Economic Development, to whom was referred Senate File 116, Wyoming Business Council Directors Reduction. Respectfully report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Bear, Burkhart, Duncan, Air, Gray, Greer, Heiner, Sherwood, Western. Representative Greer, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 9, Minerals, Business and Economic Development, to whom was referred Senate File 148, Requirements Relating to Depositors Amendments. Respectfully report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Bear, Burkhart, Duncan, Air, Greer, Heiner, Sherwood, Western. Noes, Representative Gray. Representative Greer, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 9, Minerals and Business and Economic Development, to whom was referred Senate Joint Resolution 3, engrossed, Federal Suspension and Orders on Oil and Gas Production. Respectfully report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Representatives Bear, Burkhart, Duncan, Air, Gray, Greer, Heiner, Sherwood, Western. Representative Burkhart, Acting Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom was referred Senate File 47, engrossed, Clinical Laboratory Regulation. Respectfully report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Clifford, Connolly, Flitner, Hallinan, Ottman, Romero Martinez, Stivar, Wharf, Wilson. Representative Wilson, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom was referred Senate File 109, Board of Dental Examiners Amendments. Respectfully report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Clifford, Connolly, Flitner, Hallinan, Ottman, Romero Martinez, Stivar, Wharf, Wilson. Representative Wilson, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom was referred Senate File 117, Speech and Hearing Specialist Licensing Amendments. Respectfully report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Clifford, Connolly, Flitner, Hallinan, Ottman, Romero Martinez, Stivar, Wharf, Wilson. Representative Wilson, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So members, certainly the Reverend Veit mentioned the tragedy that's occurred with our neighbors and families, and there's probably a connection here somehow in this room, and maybe we don't know about it yet. But I certainly hope, on behalf of the Wyoming House of Representatives, I want to extend our sympathies and our prayers to our neighbors to the south. Tragic day, and the repercussions are unimaginable. As we were here doing our work and civic duty, something so sensible would happen. So as you contemplate some of the challenging things that we may do during the day, let's keep those folks in our thoughts and prayers. So thank you. All right, we are at that order of business and bills on second reading. First bill for our consideration is House Bill 36. Reading clerk.
House Bill 36, sponsored by Representative Larson. Management Council membership, an act relating to the legislature.
We do have amendments. Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 36, and I'll ask for your favorable consideration. Ladies and gentlemen, we touched on this portion a little bit yesterday, but as I was trying to look at how I would divide the amendment, it became more clear that it would be way more trouble than it was worth, than to just come back in second reading and actually have a full discussion on this particular portion only. And what this amendment does is basically moves it back to the standard status quo with the committee chair. And I am concerned, and maybe these concerns are not necessarily, concreted with evidence, but I can foresee in the future where we might have some issues with the way things are done. When you think about management council, we talked yesterday about, this could be an issue with the budget session or whatever. Really, management council is not doing a lot during session. What's happening is behind the scenes outside of session and setting the calendars and setting the progress and how everything is going to occur with the way that we meet and how we meet. And what I foresee happening is if we put this into an automatic guaranteed that it slips back and forth every single year, I can potentially see where one of the chairmen has an advantage or a disadvantage every single year on how the calendar gets set or doesn't get set. And what I get even more concerned about is once that's found out or that starts working its way into the management council system, it's in statute. It's going to be really, really hard to convince that party that has that little slice of power that they want to give up that slice of power. Same argument and discussion that we've had with management council debates now for 4 out of the past 5 years that I've been here. When you have a piece of power, it's going to be very hard to convince that other party you shouldn't have that much power. And so this just takes it back to the status quo, keeps everything else identical. It does not change anything. It just keeps the chairmanship at 2 years and allows that repeats itself every 2 years. So I'd ask for your favorable consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Majority Floor Leader Summers, first time.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. On and against the amendment, but it's really the body will decide this. But I like the idea of the rotation every other year. Every year they switch. I just think it balances the power more. And so on and against.
Any other member for their first time on second reading amendment number 1? Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. And it occurs to me, I'm not exactly sure what the chairman of management council does in so far as much as any other chairman of any other committee. So in my interim joint committee, right, we actually it depends on my chairman, but we've done a lot of co-chairing, right? I'll take the morning, he'll take the afternoon. And so I guess I'm just wondering, is there any bad reason about, having co-chairs of the management council? Is there a specific reason why we have to have a chairman and can't have co-chairs like we do on every other joint interim committee? And I don't see anything in statute, but I guess I'm wondering for those of you on management council, if you can think of something specifically that grants the chairman more power than having joint chairman.
Mr. Speaker, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. So it's a good discussion to have about the switching and back and forth in the power. And to the question that was just brought by the good chairman about what other impact this might have. So current statute has the chairman of management audit committee being the opposite of the chairman of management council. So if we're going to, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but you asked about what other implications this has. So if you're switching back and forth, that's happening for 2 committees every year. And it's generally those 2 folks are the chairman, one chairman on one and one's the chairman on the other. At least that's how it's been in my tenure. It's not obligated that the management audit committee is the presiding officer from the opposite house, but that's how it's been done. I would say, just to go back to a little bit off topic, but just because you may be the chairman or the chairman may be generally the president, remember that there's also a designee issue. And so there's a designee possibility as well within the management council. So the only thing I can think of to the question is management audit alters opposite of this. That actually would have to be cleaned up in the statute if this, or I guess it wouldn't have to be cleaned up. It would still work, but 2 committees would be alternating. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any other member for their first time, second time? Representative Summers.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I think the other reason, that I like the alternating is you could get, for example, a speaker that usually goes out after a speaker, and he may never serve as chair of management council. While if you have this rotation, at least the Speaker of the House will have one year serving as chairman. So on and against.
Any other member second time before the sponsor, to the sponsor, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I actually think I agree with that point. This is tough, right? This is a really good policy decision about this bill, but I believe that the good speaker's recommendation about the fact that you have alternating chairs of management council versus management audit is even more of a reason to sit there and say, we need to keep that level across the 2 years that you're going into this. I feel like especially that you're going into this, a lot of these things that get done during the interim work for management audit can span up to 2 years. And, if you've got that management audit committee that decides that, with the new chairman, they don't want to continue pursuing a second year on a particular study or something along those lines, they can cancel that pretty quickly and move forward with something else. Again, this is a policy decision. I felt like in the amendment yesterday, it was a big broad brush stroke, and there was a lot of changes to it. I felt like this one was one that warranted at least having a little more discussion on directly. So vote your conscience, but vote aye.
Members, we're voting on second reading amendment number 1, House Bill 36. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Amendment is not adopted. Next amendment is number 2, Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I'd like to read House second reading amendment number 2 to House Bill 36 and ask for your favorable consideration. So yesterday I promised that I would bring kind of a definition for what is a majority floor leader, what is a minority floor leader. We probably don't have to have this. I don't know. It's kind of, it'd be belt and suspenders. But I thought I would give the body the opportunity to have the debate whether it's a good idea or not. I'm not married to this either way. I just think right now it's not entirely clear what a minority party is. So just for your option.
Thank you. Any member for the Representative Larson? Dan.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I would just say there's no need to muddy the water. We know what those positions are. I'd vote no.
Any other member? First time. Member first time. I see people moving, not to the mic. Member first time. Member second time. Member second time before the sponsor, to the sponsor. All right. Members, we're voting on second reading amendment number 2, House Bill 36. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment has not been adopted. House Bill 36 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration, House Bill 51.
House Bill 51, sponsored by Agriculture, Meat Processing Programs, and Act relating to the emergency expenses of government.
House Bill 51 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 127.
House Bill 127, sponsored by Representative Barlow, Public Health Amendments, and Act relating to the public health.
We do have an amendment. Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I bring to you House second reading amendment to House Bill 127. And if you look at that, I'll just read it to you. It's fairly short. Nothing in this chapter shall be construed to limit a parent or guardian's right to the care, custody, and control of a minor child under the care of the parent or guardian. And I bring this amendment to you, Mr. Speaker, because I've read of cases where a parent was not allowed to go into the room where a minor child was that had COVID. And I think that that is an extreme measure. I don't believe it's taken place in Wyoming. But I'd like to make sure by passing this amendment that it would not take place in Wyoming. And I would say that as to the authority of the health officer to do such a thing, to tell a parent that they couldn't go in the room with the sick child is an overreach and must be prevented. So with that in mind, Mr. Chairman or Mr. Speaker, I would urge your support of this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any discussion, discussing? Seeing none. All those in favor of the adoption of Representative Olson, please proceed.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, a little slow here, but just wondering if we need to do a cleanup technical correction on this amendment. Line 4, it says, and I'm looking at the corrected copy. It says parent or guardian's right to the care. And that's in the corrected copy. So I don't know if there's another corrected copy, but if this is the copy we have, it seems like it needs to read parent or guardian's right to the care. We have an extra to the that we just need to delete.
I think that's in order for what do they call a Scribner correction to strike to the, one of the two those.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
That
you,
is
Mr.
in
Speaker.
order, unless there's an objection to that. We like objecting to things when the chair, so. To the chair. All right, members, we're voting on second reading amendment number 1, House Bill 127 with the correction. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. House Bill 127, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Here, no objection is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 155.
House Bill 155, sponsored by Representative Gray. Electric generation reliability and liability, an act relating to the public utilities.
House Bill 155, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration, House Bill 157.
House Bill 157, sponsored by Representative Harshman. Healthcare Professional Education Endowment, an act relating to medical education.
We do have an amendment. Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd move second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 157, Healthcare Endowment. Members really just looking, kind of taking a page out of the old Hathaway playbook. Back in the day, we used overflow of FMRs and to fill up that Hathaway account, and proposing to do the same thing, Mr. Speaker, with amendment number 1, and that if the LSRA balance then reaches 1.4 billion, we would move 60 million if it goes to 1.46 from this savings account to a permanent savings account to fund this program to get our Wyoming kids taken care of, their Wyoming parents and Wyoming grandparents. And so really just taking that money that's currently invested in a 1% bond or low interest savings account and moving it to a 5% deal to kind of take care of those needs in the future that we're going to have. So don't know if the LSRA will hit 1.4 billion. Hopefully it does, but I'm hopeful. So with that, I'd stand for any questions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Any member for their first time? First time. Representative Gray for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker. I would urge a no vote on this, and I do think it's instructive, when we talk about diversions. So now, anytime this has over 1.4 billion, we're going to have a draw to another purpose beyond our key deficits that we have. And I understand the purpose of this program. It's nice, but I just don't think right now we can afford to do this. So I urge a no. And I also think this is really instructive on why it's right for us to get these diversions right into different accounts. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other member first time? Representative Washut for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. who knows what our deficits are going to be by the time we get to 1.4 billion in the LSRA. And I think that this is a worthy project to look at funding for our healthcare for future generations. I don't think this hurts at all. And if things change between now and the time we get to 1.4 billion, this body can certainly make adjustments to it. I encourage an aye vote.
Any other member first time? Representative Brown for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Man, I'm kind of torn on this one. I voted no on this bill in committee, and we stripped the appropriation out completely. And I don't think we have an appropriation in there. So this kind of sits out there as a lofty goal, I guess, without this amendment. So I feel like it's a good idea to have an opportunity to fund this investment in our future. But then I worry about exactly what the good representative from the northern or from the center part of the state said about diversions. I don't know if any of you have looked at the data book recently on how many tips and diversions we have. And when this hits this and it tips to here, and then when it tips to here and we get 25% here or 200% of this value, then it tips to like, man, it gets tough. So I think this is a worthy idea here that if we get to 1.4 billion, I don't see any major true issues here. That if we get to 1.4 billion, we can tip some money into this. I would entertain maybe looking at a third reading amendment to even clean it up a little more. But I'm still against the bill overall in generalities. But on this amendment, I think this amendment moves us closer to a good opportunity to fund a lofty goal. So aye on the amendment.
Any other member first time? Representative Western for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I appreciate the gentleman from the center of the state and his concerns. And I think they are valid, but we have to think big picture here. One of the main charges of this body, of this institution, is to provide for a future of the state, right? And we've got all these budget concerns and fluctuations in commodity prices. It puts us in a mode of defensive thinking, budget cuts, all that kind of stuff. And that's good, right? Defensive measures are good, but they don't secure a prosperous future. Thinking offensively does. And if we think about what are the kind of jobs we want in this state, healthcare jobs are pretty dang good, whether it's in our state or across the country. And I think this is something, the amendment certainly funds it, and the bill itself helps secure that and provide for some of those jobs, whether it be RN, scrub techs, and we got to fund it somehow. So I'm certainly open to a better idea, but this is what's on the table right now. So please vote aye.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time, Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So ladies and gentlemen, I think this is a great program and I support it. With regards to this amendment, I want to just help educate the body to some degree that there's probably a 50-50 chance that we're going to be over 1.4 at the end of this biennium. So what we need to decide is this where we want this money to go? Or do we want to use it to help our education deficit? And frankly, they're both good things. But I just think you need to know the whole picture that, you may recall when we started this session, I said, there's a good chance we might even reach 1.5 this year at the end of this biennium if our current funding sources, oil and gas prices remain where they are without any other impacts. So, but it's a great program. And so I support the program, but I want everyone to know where we are and what will happen.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? We are on first time. First time to second time. Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just want to make a couple more comments. I think it's really important when we think about these accounts that when I try to approach this, try to be principled and think about what the purpose of each account is. And so I think of the general fund as for discretionary expenditure related to the ordinary purposes of government. So if this flow were out of the general fund, I wouldn't have as much of an issue with it. But the reality is you don't have the money in the general fund. And so then we get these sorts of amendments out of LISRA. And the way I think of LISRA is back in this period of declining revenues, I think of it as the backfill on our core deficits. And if we're not going to flow existing revenues into the biggest core deficit, existing revenues into SFP, which has been a little bit of a struggle for a variety of reasons, then I think that we need to think about this account as the backstop. And every time we do a flow out of this account, we're getting closer and closer to basically an Armageddon situation. We have a statute that if there's not the money to pay for SFP, the state superintendent basically distributes the funds as she likes for the amount that's there. And that would be a 25 to 30% decline potentially. So I think that we need to vote no on this amendment. And it's just too much of a distribution out of that account. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other member for their second time before the sponsor, second time to the sponsor, Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members, for your consideration. I think, you choose a number out there, and we've done this over time because Wyoming does do this. And if we leave here in another week and we have another event like we did last year, we're not going to reach 1.4. And so the idea to put that out there, we're at 1.4 billion. That's really good news. It's good for Wyoming. And I will tell you, we know through demographics, this is a huge issue. And I just would soon start investing in our own kids. Have them here, we send them out of state and they marry somebody from out of state and then we never see them again. And all the while we're sending 26 million every 2 years to out of state institutions. And so again, it's really moving savings to savings. We're not spending the money. It'll be saved forever, but instead of generating 1%, it'll generate 5% and grow our own kids to serve our own people. So appreciate your consideration, your aye vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Members, we are voting on second reading, amendment number 1, House Bill 157. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Chairman has no idea. All those in favor, please rise. All those opposed? $2730. The amendment has not been adopted. House Bill 157, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objections, so ordered. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 159.
House Bill 159, sponsored by Representative Duncan. Liquor manufacturer regulations, an act relating to the regulation of alcoholic liquor.
House Bill 159, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration, House Bill 161.
House Bill 161, sponsored by Representative Romero Martinez. Human life equality, prohibiting discriminatory abortions, an act relating to abortions.
We do have an amendment. Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 161, and I ask for your favorable consideration. Friends, what this amendment does 3 distinct things adding to this bill. Admittedly, I am confused about this bill and how it could honestly be implemented. But that being the case, the 3 things that it does is, because this bill is about genetic screening, it has the Department of Health providing genetic screening without cost for all pregnant women who request it, and that they be given the results of that genetic screening. The second thing it does is, if you remember, there's kind of a laundry list in the middle of the bill that says what would constitute a discriminatory abortion. To have a more inclusive list, I've included sexual orientation. And then the third thing that it does, it says that there shall be a program to reimburse pregnant women who, because of this act, carry to term an unwanted pregnancy. And that there is the coverage of medical costs for a child that's born with a disability until adulthood. So I would ask for your favorable consideration. What this amendment does is it clarifies that we as a state have said that genetic testing is important, it is valuable. We do not want the results of that genetic testing to be used for an abortion. But if a woman chooses to is obligated to carry a pregnancy to term, that we will take care of that child. That is our obligation. So I would ask for your favorable consideration.
Thank you, Madam Minority Floater. Any other member for their first time? First time, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against the amendment and for the bill, I don't believe that the amendment aligns with the intent of the bill. Although prenatal, maternal, and fetal genetic testing is popular nowadays, you can actually get one in the town that we're in. The reality is that sex selection abortions are occurring in the United States. Prenatal testing can be a valuable tool for diagnosing and treating conditions. However, it can be used as a precursor for aborting an unborn child. Recent studies have showed that more than 90% of unborn children diagnosed with Down syndrome are aborted. Clearly, this is the chilling side towards eugenics, and it must be confronted. There are thousands of awaiting people out there that are willing to adopt disabled infants. Again, the amendment doesn't align with the intent of the bill. I urge a no vote.
Thank you very much. Chairman Wilson, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just briefly, the previous speaker made many good points. To reiterate, obviously, the value of adoption for people who, we're not mandating that the woman has to take care of the child for the rest of its life. If she feels unable to care for the child after it's born, there are many good options for that. And I would point out, with our robust discussion on Medicaid yesterday, that we do already have an existing program. Medicaid pays for, that's what the DD waiver is, that in the goodness of our heart, in the budget discussion, we added some money back into that. We have a facility in the center of the state. If the person is severely handicapped, the state of Wyoming already provides medical services, education services for that person. And I could go on, but I won't.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? Chairman Flitner for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against the amendment.
Representative Stith for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, I just have a question about how this amendment, if adopted, would play out. So the bill as drafted says that you can't perform an abortion if one of the reasons that you are seeking it is because you are pregnant with a girl and you really wanted a boy, for example, right? So if we adopt the amendment, does that mean that someone can say, hey, I really wanted a boy and I would have had an abortion, but I'm going to have a girl. And so now because I'm having a girl, the state has to pay for everything associated with this girl, all the medical costs, all the in-home care and out-of-home care until adulthood. Is that what this amendment does? That's my question for the sponsor of the amendment.
Thank you very much. Any member for their first time? Additional members for their first time, second time, second time before the sponsor, to the sponsor, Madam Minority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just to answer the last person at the mic, the answer is no. If you kind of see on line 35 of the amendment, that care that was being listed is for a child that was born with a disability, not for the other elements that were listed. So on and in favor of the amendment, and the discussion with some of the other speakers was really about adoption. My goodness, I am so in favor of adoption all the way around. There are people in this body who have adopted children. There are people in this body who have been adopted. There are people in this body who have wanted to adopt. It is an incredible heartful, heartless, all of that in terms of how we as a society take care of children. There is no two ways about that. But that being said, there is nothing like carrying a child. And many, many women could never conceive of giving away a child for adoption. We can't say that a woman will be obligated, because we're forbidding her from having an abortion, to give away a child for adoption. That woman might need to care for that child and want to take care of that child with all of her heart and soul. We cannot as a body say you should be giving away that child. So I would ask you to consider, right, that if we are obligating a woman to carry an unintended pregnancy, right, through birth, that we have that obligation. So on and in favor.
Thank you very much. Members, we are voting on second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 161. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment has not been adopted. House Bill 161, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration, House Bill 162.
House Bill 162, sponsored by Representative Romero Martinez, Medical Treatment Opportunity Act, an act relating to Medicaid.
House Bill 162, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Next bill is House Bill 189.
House Bill 189, sponsored by Representative Hunt, mine product taxes for natural gas consumed on site, an act relating to mine product taxes.
House Bill 189, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration, House Bill 195.
House Bill 195, sponsored by Representative Olson, Wyoming Medical Review Panel, repeal, an act relating to the Medical Review Panel.
House Bill 195, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Next bill, House Bill 210.
House Bill 210, sponsored by Representative Bear, minor sex traffic victims liability, an act relating to human trafficking.
House Bill 210, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 219.
House Bill 219, sponsored by Representative Nicholas, Investment Funds Committee membership, an act relating to the investment of state funds.
We do have an amendment. Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would move second reading amendment to House Bill 219 and ask for your favorable consideration. Ladies and gentlemen, you may recall when I presented this bill yesterday, I informed the body that in meetings with our state treasurer, that I would bring a second reading amendment that allowed that basically, and just to go back a little, that the bill as it was presented in 219 provided that the IFC will pick its own chairman. Currently, in the existing statute, and without this bill, the state treasurer is the chairman of the committee. And so in discussions with the state treasurer and with the IFC, this was kind of a compromise that we came up with. And so what this does is makes the state treasurer the chairman of the IFC on off years. So alternating years, and then the years that he's not the chairman, he's still a member, the IFC will select the chairman. The IFC has the option of reappointing the chairman, but what it does is it allows the interplay of the IFC with the treasurer, and so I'd ask for your favorable consideration.
Thank you. Any member on second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 219? Any members? First time? Any members? Seeing none. Members, we are voting on second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 219. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. House Bill 219, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration, House Bill 231.
House Bill 231, sponsored by Representative McGuire, college credit retention, an act relating to post-secondary education.
House Bill 231, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration, House Bill 239.
House Bill 239, sponsored by Representative Greer, workers' compensation, student learner agreements, an act relating to workers' compensation.
House Bill 239, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Next bill, House Bill 244.
House Bill 244, sponsored by House Appropriations, State Investment Administration, an act relating to public funds.
House Bill 244, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration, House Bill 247.
House Bill 247, sponsored by Representative Provenza, Law Enforcement Hiring Practices, an act relating to peace officers.
We do have an amendment. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 247 and ask for your favorable consideration. This amendment clarifies and provides the proper sideboards to the bill to ensure that officers who leave while under investigation for serious misconduct aren't just assumed to have engaged in that serious misconduct. So what this amendment would do is ensure that that investigation is completed and that the commission that oversees this determines that that misconduct actually did occur. So there was some concern in committee that we might have unintentionally sent officers for revocation of their certification if they quit under investigation. That certainly wasn't the intent of the bill. And so this amendment clarifies that language, assures that we protect good officers, and allows for that commission to investigate those concerns of serious misconduct. So I ask for your favorable consideration. We'll stand for questions if there are any.
Thank you very much. Any member for their first time? Member for their first time, member second time? Members, we are voting on second reading amendment number 1, House Bill 247. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. House Bill 247, having read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration. Turn the page. House Bill 253.
House Bill 253, sponsored by Representative Gray, University of Wyoming, ban on funding for abortions, an act relating to the University of Wyoming.
We do have an amendment. Madam Minority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 253, and I ask for your favorable consideration. Friends, I think that there is something that we can all agree on, and it might not be abortion. All right, I'll put that right out there. But I hope that we would agree on that we would like to, take care of pregnant women, have healthy pregnancies and healthy children, and also to prevent unintended pregnancies. That's how you have, fewer abortions, is you don't have unintended pregnancies. And what this bill does is it thinks about, honestly, it contemplates young people, young women at the university and the community colleges. And where yesterday, what we did is we prevented the health insurance that they have from covering abortion to actually getting at the issue of unintended pregnancies. So what this amendment does is simply assure that any healthcare coverage allows for long-acting reversible contraception for any student who asks for it. And with that, I ask for your favorable consideration.
Any member for their first time, second reading amendment number 1, first time? Representative Olson for your first time, Chairman Olson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just trying to, I think it is an and, okay. I was just trying to figure out if this applied to the community colleges and the university. That's my question, but I think I was reading in that first lines 13 through 19 where I didn't see it referenced. So maybe you can just clarify that, maybe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? Representative Gray, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So it was interesting after the objection yesterday is the person that filed the bill. I can tell you this is definitely outside the original intent of the bill. And this is not what we want to be doing, to make a requirement in order to receive state funds that they're going to be making funds available for long-acting reversible contraceptives. I mean, that's not consistent with what I think we want to do as a body. So I urge a no vote on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? member for their first time. Representative Williams, first time.
Thank you,
On
Mr.
the
Speaker.
amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against the amendment, in favor of the bill. I would agree with the good representative that just spoke. The amendment is outside the intent of the bill. And according to multiple sources, the only way to really prevent a pregnancy 100% is abstinence.
Any other member for their first time? Representative Martinez, for your first time. On the amendment.
On and against the amendment, the issue of unintended pregnancies being brought up. What the suggestions have been throughout the committee that works with health and labor and social services is that, and has come from my mouth in talking to stakeholders also, is there is a technology out there called, it's a scientific name, but it's a technology that helps in the planning procreative process. Those that, so just real brief, against the amendment, for the bill. It's very clear bill.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? Representative Duncan, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm completely confused about the objections. So help me understand, the way I'm reading this, long-term contraception is to prevent unintended pregnancies, which is, I think, why you don't want an abortion. So if we're not for abortion, why wouldn't we encourage unintended pregnancies? So I'm not understanding the objection. So please help me.
Any other member for their first time? First time, Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The IUD is one of the long-term contraceptive devices. And there is a significant risk of pelvic inflammatory disease with an IUD. And I think that the state would be undergoing some liability if these people that they paid for these IUDs and they got pelvic inflammatory disease. So I think that this is a good reason for us not to pay for these long-term contraceptives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? First time. Representative Ottman, for your first time on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was just going to say, I believe that the purpose here was talking about the funding for abortions. If people want birth control of any sort, that's a personal choice, and you are certainly free in this country to do that. So I just, I would be against the amendment and on for the bill because I don't think that it pertains to what we're trying to do here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? First time, seeing none. Second time before the sponsor, to the sponsor, Madam Minority Floor Leader Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the conversation and the questions. Let me answer some of the questions. First, it does apply to the community colleges. Lines 14 through 19 are UW. Lines 27 through 29 are the community colleges. And then there was a discussion about the appropriateness of the amendment. And I would say what this bill did is it went in and it said that this is a limitation on health insurance for students at UW and the community colleges. We want to assure that that health insurance does not cover abortions, right? This amendment doesn't touch that. It goes in and says the health insurance for students must cover contraceptions when requested. That's all. It's not mandatory. We're not handing out pills, IUDs, or condoms, right, to students willy-nilly. It's just that that health insurance coverage should include contraception, right? That's our purpose. Our purpose is unintended pregnancy, isn't it? So let's make sure, if we're going to go into health insurance, let's make sure that that health insurance coverage has that option. That's what this amendment does. And with that, I'd ask for your aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, we are voting on second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 253. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Amendment has not been adopted. House Bill 253 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 254.
House Bill 254, sponsored by Representative Burkhart. Transportation Computer System, an act relating to the funding of government operations.
House Bill 254 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 263.
House Bill 263, sponsored by Representative Nicholas. State Coronavirus Recovery Funding, an act relating to emergency funding of government.
We do have amendments. Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would move second reading number 1 to House Bill 263 and ask for your favorable consideration, ladies and gentlemen. Coming over from the Senate is a bill, Senate File 118, and it has multiple components to it. The first component takes the roughly $20 million as requested by the chief executive of the CARES Act dollars for approved but projects that were approved from our May special session last year, but they were either unable to finish on time or the application was insufficient. So that's what the first $20 million is. And so basically those things have already been approved. They either ran out of time or they ran out of money, one or the other, or they couldn't fit within the time qualifications. There's another $18 million, which is that is also from the special session that are for broadband and a few other things that those were time limited and they couldn't get the work done on time. So what this does is it incorporates that first 20 million and the second 18 million as part of it authorizes the governor to go forward with those programs, basically reorganize them and refund those so that they can be completed. And they can do that immediately upon the passage of this bill. So I ask for your favorable consideration.
Thank you. Any member for their first time, second time? Members, we are voting on second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 236. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. We have another amendment. Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would move second reading amendment number 2 to House Bill 263 and ask for your favorable consideration. Members, all this does is it places the same parameters on the Wyoming Life Resource Center and the Wyoming State Hospital as are placed in the bill on our other Wyoming healthcare providers and healthcare facilities. So I would ask for your favorable consideration.
Thank you. Members, first time, Chairman Nicholas.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'm on in favor of the amendment.
Further discussion on the amendment, further discussion, seeing none. Members, we are voting on second reading amendment number 2, House Bill 263. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. House Bill 263 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Next bill for our consideration is House Joint Resolution 13.
House Joint Resolution 13, sponsored by Representative Nicholas. Support of Taiwan, a joint resolution in support of Taiwan.
House Joint Resolution 13, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the resolution be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move the consent list consisting of the following bills: House Bills House Bill 92, House Bill 142, House Bill 158, House Bill 170, House Bill 197, and House Bill 205.
Would any member like any of the bills on consent removed? Would any member like any of the bills on consent removed? Seeing none, reading clerk, please read the bills on consent list.
House Bill 92, sponsored by Management Council, the Revisers Bill, an act relating to the revision of statutes being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 142, sponsored by Blockchain, commercial filing system update, an act relating to corporations, partnerships, and associations being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 158, sponsored by Representative Harshman, local land use planning and zoning, an act relating to land use planning being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 170, sponsored by Representative Henderson, Wyoming Economic Development Zones, an act relating to economic development being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 197, sponsored by Representative Newsom, Connect Wyoming Program, federal funding, an act relating to the emergency expenses of government related to broadband internet access being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 205, sponsored by Representative Banks, Select Committee on Extractive Industry Transitions, an act relating to the legislature being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
Having been read three separate times, the question asks, shall these bills pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Roll call on the consent list. Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago excused. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Kenner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stiff. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Brown. We have 59 aye, 1 excused. As for House Bill 92, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 59 aye, 1 excused. As for House Bill 142, are there any changes? Gray, aye to no. Burt, aye to no. Zawanitzer, aye to no. Nyman, aye to no. Summers, aye to no. Clausen, aye to no. Haroldson, aye to no. Wharf, aye to no. Williams, aye to no. Knapp, aye to no. Greer, aye to no. Winter, aye to no. Hallinan, aye to no. Larson Dan, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Fortner, aye to no. Jennings, aye to no. Stivar, aye to no. Blackburn, aye to no. Hunt, aye to no. Ottman, aye to no. Washit, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 37 aye, 22 no, 1 excused. As for House Bill 158, are there any changes? Yin, aye to no. Larson Dan, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Fortner, aye to no. Winter, aye to no. Jennings, aye to no. Banks, aye to no. Sweeney, aye to no. Clifford, aye to no. Heiner, aye to no. O'Hearn, aye to no. Provenza, aye to no. Burt, aye to no. Connolly, aye to no. Nyman, aye to no. Sherwood, aye to no. Newsom, aye to no. Roscoe, aye to no. Summers, aye to no. McGuire, aye to no. Clausen, aye to no. Further changes? Bear, no to aye. Okay. Zawanitzer, aye to no. Further changes? Hallinan, aye to no. Air, aye to no. Further changes? Duncan, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote is closed. 35 aye, 24 no, 1 excused. As for House Bill 170, are there any changes? Gray, aye to no. Walters, aye to no. Oakley, aye to no. Wilson, aye to no. Burt, aye to no. Clausen, aye to no. Heiner, aye to no. Washit, aye to no. Simpson, aye to no. Brown, aye to no. Blackburn, aye to no. Haroldson, aye to no. Wharf, aye to no. Knapp, aye to no. Larson Lloyd, aye to no. Winter, aye to no. Larson Dan, aye to no. Fortner, aye to no. Baker, aye to no. Jennings, aye to no. Stivar, aye to no. Nyman, aye to no. Ottman, aye to no. Martinez, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 35 aye, 24 no, 1 excused. As for House Bill 197, are there any changes? Are there any? Okay. Baker, aye to no. Jennings, aye to no. Fortner, aye to no. Stivar, aye to no. Larson Dan, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Williams, aye to no. Gray, aye to no. Burt, aye to no. Andrew, aye to no. Further changes? Winter, aye to no. Ottman, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 47 aye, 12 no, 1 excused. And as for House Bill 205, are there any changes? Jennings, aye to no. Stivar, aye to no. Greer, aye to no. Knapp, aye to no. Fortner, aye to no. Larson Dan, I to know. Bear, I to know. Air, I to know. Baker, I to know. Duncan, I to know. Winter, I to know. Wharf, I to know. Williams, I to know. Flitner, I to know. Olson, I to know. Larson Lloyd, I to know. Simpson, I to know. Washit, I to know. Heiner, I to know. Gray, I to know. Burkhart, I to know. Ottman, I to know. Henderson, I to know. Burt, I to know. Nicholas, I to know. Martinez, I to know. Walters, I to know. Henderson or Haroldson, I to know. Blackburn, I to know. Nyman, I to know. Hunt, I to know. Clausen, I to know. Sweeney, I to know. Kenner, I to know. Newsom, I to know. Harshman, I to know. Oakley, I to know. Summers, I to know. Mr. Speaker, I to know. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote is closed. 20 aye, 39 no, 1 excused.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bills 92, 142, 158, 170, and 197 have passed the House. Having not received affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 205 has failed to pass the House. Yes, please. Representative Simpson, a privilege of the floor. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Privilege of the floor.
Please.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I have some guests in the balcony I'd like to introduce to you. This is the Student Council of the Star Valley Middle School, and they've traveled a long, long ways to be here with you today. Please welcome them.
Well, welcome to the House, Star Valley. We certainly appreciate you being here and hope that we can provide you with some insight into how we operate. And I'm sure you do good work where you are with your responsibilities. So welcome. All right, members. So we're going to continue with our third reading regular list, but I think just because we're going to be breaking here in 40 minutes, and I don't think we're going to get through 173 in 40 minutes, just guessing. I'm just going to slide 173 and 174 to the bottom of the list. So the first bill will be House Bill 180. They will be heard today. They will be heard today, unless someone else brings a motion. So the first bill for our consideration on third reading regular will be House Bill 187.
House Bill 187, sponsored by Representative Hunt. Elected official residency requirement, an act relating to elected officials being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
We do have an amendment. Representative Chairman Wilson, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 187 and ask for your favorable consideration. Again, and I just guess, I think it must be slow this week. and the last week too. So my apologies, really should have been a second reading amendment, intended to be a friendly amendment. We had some discussion on committee of the whole about the difficulty of recruiting, finding some of these staff, some special qualifications. So what I thought I would do is kind of, I don't want to say divide the baby after the discussions that we've had lately, but divide the personnel, let's call it that. And I'm not sure that I have the actual form. I have the proposed amendment. I think that's good enough. What I am doing is pulling out 4 positions that I perceive as being kind of specialty, a little bit hard to find. That being clerk of district court, and of course the district court is a broader place, coroner, the district attorney, and the county and prosecuting attorney, pulling them out so that they can continue under the current system. Leaving in the other 5, which are county clerk, commissioners, sheriff, treasurer, and assessor. And my reasoning on that is it seems to me that these positions are very close to the people of the community. In other words, your county commissioners, you know, the treasurer the assessor assesses your property, the treasurer takes your money, the sheriff hopefully arrests you or sends you on your way. But it seems to me that there's a real value in having those positions be from the county itself. So those are left in. And then the other thing that I did as our trying to just pin down our language about residing. So then you'll see sprinkled again throughout for those 5 categories, the phrasing beginning on the first day of the term and through the last day of the term. In other words, the person could file for the office, they could move and then just have to move into the county. You know, I mean, if they lived over the border, if our desire is to have them living in the county, to have those people actually have to reside during their term. So that's my attempt at finding a sweet spot, and I'll be glad to take any questions.
Madam Chairman, would you just, for clarity, would you move the amendment? Thank you for the explanation. Would you just move it? Because I didn't hear it if you did. Thank you.
Beg your pardon. I move third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 187 and ask for your favorable consideration.
Thank you. We're on third reading amendment number 1. Any member for their first time? Representative Hunt, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a good amendment. Excuse me, good compromise. So please vote aye.
Chairman Zwanitzer, first time on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, on the amendment. I'll be broad though. For the amendment, still against the bill, but and everything I like about it, the amendment still exposes the fundamental flaw you have in the legislation. There's no requirement like that, say there is for a legislator, that you actually have to be in that county to file. And I keep hearing that's what we want. So what the bill does and what this amendment then kind of bifurcates depending on position is really under the law. If you look at the definition of residency in our election, it's where you intend to live. And if you could live somewhere else, but you intend to go back, what you're saying here is me as an individual, I could probably file to be the county clerk in 23 counties, and whichever one actually elected me, then I have to move there by January 3rd, I think is the current date, to serve. And so I guess I couldn't serve more than one, but I can still file in all of them. And there's no requirement in the law or in this bill that would say I have to be a resident of the county when I file to run for that office. And so what the bringer of the amendment has done, and rightfully she has to bifurcate it with this new language for those 4 that from the day of service to the day of end of service of your term, you have to reside there. But it still doesn't fix the fundamental problem about being able to run, which from what I understand, having 2 instances in this state, both in the same county where this bill originates from, and I know there's hard feelings on who got elected, but it doesn't mean we need a statewide law that now we're kind of bifurcating important positions that people who live in that county apparently can assume, and things that are, I shouldn't say less important, but you don't have to live in that county to know about how to, I guess, be a coroner. I'm not sure. I just think that the concept continues to have issues. The amendment makes it better. I think for the purposes of the bill, it might make it worse long-term, and we're trying to decide, if you're running for offices, and I think we all know there's some people in certain counties who rotate through offices. They were county commissioners and then are coroners and then are the assessor. It gets really weird. So in favor of the amendment, would still ask you to vote no on the bill.
Thank you. Representative Washut, for your first time on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and for the amendment. I think it makes the bill better. These specific offices do have unique characteristics and responsibilities. The voters still have the final say, of course, but I think the amendment makes the bill better. On and for.
Thank you. Any other member? First time, second time to the sponsor, Chairman Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I admit, I cannot solve all weirdness of the world in the amendment. That's a true statement. But I think it makes it better, and I think it allows for some flexibility, especially in a rural community. One will presume if the person says, yeah, I live on this particular piece of my ranch over the boundary, but I'll change locations. I mean, I think we have to allow some flexibility in that. And I didn't want to make it too tight. So I'm kind of compromising on a number of places, and that's where I landed. Thank you. Please vote aye.
Members, we are voting on third reading amendment number 1, House Bill 187. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. House Bill 187, having been read 3 separate times. The question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew, Baker, Banks, Bear, Blackburn, Brown, Burkhart, Burt, Clausen, Clifford, Connolly, Crago excused, Duncan, Eklund, Air, Flitner, Fortner, Gray, Greer, Hallinan, Haroldson, Harshman, Heiner, Henderson, Hunt, Jennings, Kenner, Knapp, Larson Lloyd, Larson Dan, McGuire, Martinez, Nyman, Newsom, Nicholas, Oakley, Obermuller, O'Hearn, Olson, Ottman, Paxton, Provenza, Roscoe, Schwartz, Sherwood, Simpson, Summers, Stith, Stivar, Sweeney, Walters, Washut, Western, Wharf, Williams, Wilson, Winter, Yin, Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 42 aye, 17 no, 1 excused.
Having received the majority vote of the affirmative vote of the majority of members elected to the House, House Bill 187 has passed the House. Members, I'm informed that there's an amendment still being drafted on 198, so we're just going to move it down the list and proceed with House Bill 249. House Bill 249.
House Bill 249, sponsored by Representative Clifford. Railroad safety, an act relating to railroads, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
We do have an amendment. Chairman Greer.
Mr. Speaker, I move third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 249, ask for an aye vote. Members, I apologize. This is simply a correction. If you recall the second reading amendment, we had a distribution of the fines to, I think it was a common school account. By Article 7, Section 5 of our Constitution, those fines that are collected need to go to the public school fund of the respective or applicable county. That's That's all this is doing, is just deleting out that provision, which didn't conform to our Constitution. Apologize for taking up your time. Ask for an aye vote on the amendment. Please vote no on the bill.
So members, we are voting on third reading amendment number 1, House Bill 249. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. House Bill 249, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew, Baker, Banks, Bear, Blackburn, Brown, Burkhart, Burt, Clausen, Clifford, Connolly, Crago excused, Duncan, Eklund, Air, Flitner, Fortner, Gray, Greer, Hallinan, Haroldson, Harshman, Heiner, Henderson, Hunt, Jennings, Kenner, Knapp, Larson Lloyd, Larson Dan, McGuire, Martinez, Nyman, Newsom, Nicholas, Oakley, Obermuller, O'Hearn, Olson, Ottman. Repeat, please. Paxton, Provenza, Roscoe, Schwartz, Sherwood, Simpson, Summers, Stith, Stivar, conflict, Sweeney, Walters, Washit, Western, Wharf, Williams, Wilson, Winter, Yin, Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 36 aye, 22 no, 1 excused, 1 conflict.
House Bill 249, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 249 has passed the House. Next bill for our consideration is House Joint Resolution 9.
House Joint Resolution 9, sponsored by Representative Sweeney, Local Government Investment and Equities, a joint resolution proposing to amend the Wyoming Constitution to allow local government entities to invest in stocks and equities subject to legislative authorization. Being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
Thank you very much. Just members, as a reminder, this is a proposing an amendment to the Wyoming Constitution. Therefore, it takes a 2/3 vote of this body and the body down the hall to carry it forward. So with that, House Joint Resolution 9, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the joint resolution pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew, Baker, Banks, Bear, Blackburn, Brown, Burkhart, Burt, Clausen, Clifford, Connolly, Crago excused, Duncan, Eklund, Air, Flitner, Fortner, Gray, Greer, Hallinan, Haroldson, Harshman, Heiner, Henderson, Hunt, Jennings, Kenner, Knapp, Larson Lloyd, Larson Dan, McGuire, Martinez, Nyman, Newsom, Nicholas, Oakley, Obermuller, O'Hearn, Olson, Ottman, Paxton, Provenza, Roscoe, Schwartz, Sherwood, Simpson, Summers. Stiff. Stivart.
No.
Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote is closed. 43 aye, 16 no, 1 excused.
House Joint Resolution 9, having received 2/3 vote of the affirmative vote of the majority of the affirmative vote of the 2/3 of the members elected to the House, House Joint Resolution 9 has passed the House. Next joint resolution, 11.
House Joint Resolution 11, sponsored by Representative Summers. State sovereignty impacted by federal actions. A joint resolution requesting the federal government to respect state sovereignty. Being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
We do have an amendment. Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading amendment number 1 to House Joint Resolution number 11, and I would ask for your favorable consideration. What this amendment does is just acknowledge the acknowledgement that the Indian tribes of the United States of America are expressly mentioned in the United States Constitution. And so what that does is just recognize the sovereignty and the distinct governments of the 2 tribes that reside here in our wonderful state of Wyoming. And I would ask for your favorable consideration.
Thank you. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, first time.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Honor and support.
Further discussion, any other member for their first time? Any other member for the first time? Members, we are voting on third reading amendment number 1 to House Joint Resolution 11. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. House Joint Resolution 11, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago excused. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Kenner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stiff. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 56 aye, 3 no, 1 excused.
House Joint Resolution 11, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Joint Resolution 11 has passed the House. So members, it's been come to my attention that House Bill 198 is the materials are out and ready, amendments or whatever we were waiting on. So we're just going to go ahead and proceed with that. 198, everything was ready. So Chief Clerk, I think we stop early and start early, or we just keep working. And I think House Bill 198, if we can go with that. Sorry, Chief Clerk, Reading Clerk, getting you out of order, messing up your order. Follow the script, Barlow. So House Bill 198.
House Bill 198, sponsored by Representative Nicholas, University Water System, an act relating to the University of Wyoming being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
House, there are amendments. There's a surprise. The First Amendment. Representative Larson Dan, thank you. Sorry about that.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I move third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 198 and ask for your favorable consideration. As you can see in this, on page 2, line 3, after university, we insert for miscellaneous use where water is to be used for landscape watering, lawns, athletic fields, trees, shrubs, and flowers. This is exactly what's coming out of the permits that were filed with the state engine, with the agency that controls water. And so I just think it needs to be in there. Just to clarify it, it makes me feel better about the bill. So I'm on the amendment, vote for that and vote for the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? Representative Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm somewhat ambivalent about this amendment. It does follow the language of the well permit. And for that purpose, for these particular wells, it doesn't really have an impact. The problem that I have with this amendment is the way that this bill is crafted. For example, on the ranch property that UW owns, that's a large tract of property that goes up the hill, go over to the top above Laramie. So it's a large swath of ground. So by inserting this language, if UW chooses to drill a well on the top of the hill in order to irrigate and also to water livestock, they couldn't do it. They could only irrigate. And if the Ag College over on the west side of Laramie chose to drill a well and do research on the water well, or if the College of Engineering did the such, or in other properties that are under the control of the University of Wyoming, this limits all of those wells to this particular use. And so, and UW has made it quite plain and explicit that they're only going to use this well to irrigate Jacoby Golf Course. So, and they've conceded to that, and they've conceded that this is only going to be non-potable water. So I would suggest this amendment really isn't necessary, and it may have other issues for other wells that the UW may want to drill that have nothing to do with this issue between the city and UW. And so I don't think it damages this particular situation. So on and against.
Thank you. Chairman Wilson, first time on the amendment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I feel like I'm against the amendment, and I'm not a big person with wells of water on my little 3.5 acres, but I'm just not clear if we put into statute some specificity on a water use for a particular operation. I mean, because I don't think we want to look at just this particular event at this particular well. Broadly, doesn't the state engineer's office have the right to change what they say of wells, or what they should be used for? And how does that work if in statute we decide to specifically indicate some outcome about water use? What if the state engineer's office, has sort of a control order next year or something other? It seems to me that we're writing into statute something dealing with a specific occasion that probably has consequences far beyond that. So that's why I would vote no.
Any other member for their first time on the flowers? First time. First time, second time to the sponsor, Representative Larson, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good questions. There's no regulations on groundwater in this area. There is toward Torrington and such, just because we have neighboring states that are very concerned about the aquifer there. And about future wells, we could deal with this in future wells. If they have future wells that they're gonna, go out and drill, let's deal with it then. But to make this bill suitable to me, I think we need to put this in there. I would be, if you vote for this amendment, I would encourage that. If it goes down, I don't know if I'm in favor of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, we are voting on third reading, amendment number 1, House Bill 198. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is not adopted. Division being called. All those in favor of third reading amendment number 1, please stand. I just want you to take a look at the room. I'm deaf on this side. So therefore, I stand corrected, 35 in favor of the amendment. The amendment is adopted. Have a second amendment, Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second amendment, second reading to House Bill 198 and ask for your favorable consideration. The purpose of this amendment is to address right-of-way concerns and to clarify the intent of this well currently to be used to water the golf course. If the university wishes to expand their independent water system to water other landscaped areas of campus that are not adjoining or bordering the golf course, the amendment provides a methodology for the university to require right-of-way access from whomever the entity is, either the city or the county that owns that right-of-way. So I just think this is a courtesy to keep those communications open as the university may consider expansion of the use of this well. Thank you.
Any member for the Representative Stith, first time on the amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, just a question for the bringer of the amendment. It looks like this would give the city a veto over the university's actions because it would require a use agreement. An agreement implies consent of both parties, including in this case, the city. Is that accurate?
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? First time, Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you. On and against the amendment, ladies and gentlemen. So this, I would respectfully submit that this amendment does not make sense because anytime you have a right of way or an easement and someone else has to cross it or use it or interfere with it, as a matter of state law, you're required to have an agreement and obtain that right. So this is the law. And the idea that we'll put this in here that just restates what the law of Wyoming is, it just doesn't make any sense. So on and against.
Any other member for their first time? This is first time, third reading, amendment number 2. First time, second time to the sponsor, Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think it hurts to clarify that this is the current law. I envision the university wishes to expand the water system beyond the golf course and they cross Grand Avenue. That impacts every citizen in our community in terms of construction of that line, interrupted traffic flow. And I do think there should be a transparent process so that our community knows what is happening to our infrastructure. So thank you for your consideration.
Members, we are voting on third reading amendment number 2, House Bill 198. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is not adopted. We have a third reading amendment. Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading amendment number 3 to House Bill 198 and will withdraw it at the proper time. So just wanted to take a few moments here to talk a little bit about this issue, and I appreciate you. I just handed out 2 different handouts, and like any dispute, and I believe in truth, it becomes a little bit difficult to untangle who is in the right and who is in the wrong. And sometimes it is totally one-sided. Sometimes it's not, sometimes a combination of both. But I'm all about looking at the facts to untangle in disputes what side is right, what side is wrong. So I want to go off the fact sheet first. Now, I want to start with the fact that cities have a fiduciary duty to protect their citizens' water right. Their citizens' water right, not their water right. And that's in case law. And the ordinance passed by Laramie that they feel is necessary to do that is similar to that in Gillette, Riverton, Alpine, Jackson. It doesn't preclude all wells, but this is very important. It is counter to some of the discussion we heard in second reading. An interference study has not been conducted yet. The permit was granted under Wyoming statute as a matter of course. But don't get me wrong, and this is one of the big problems I have with this bill. If there are legal problems with the ordinance, then bring that through the court system for everyone, because everyone's subject to the ordinance in the city. But don't build a carve out for one entity, which this body does a lot. And I think it's a bad trend. The ordinance is an ordinance for everybody. And frankly, other Wyoming communities have this ordinance. And rather than us build this little carve out, let's have the ordinance itself go through the proper legal channels. The city has proposed 6 solutions that are very intricate. And that's the other letter. And really, they've just been ignored. And I'm afraid that the university's intentions are clear here, and that's to create this city within a city, which even the bringer of the bill has kind of alluded to, that there's somehow this separate carve out. Yes, in the Wyoming Constitution, they talk about the university. But the idea that we're going to create a city within a city, it's expensive, it's inefficient, it's unnecessary. And there are plenty of good options that protect the citizens' water right, to provide free non-potable water to the university. And that letter lays that out. But it seems like no matter what the city does, they can't get a dialogue with the university. And I'd pose to you that is this sort of statute, this sort of carve out, part of what they're contemplating? And I don't think it's appropriate. And it's not good policy. So with that, I open it up for more debate. Thank you.
Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, on and against the amendment. So first of all, what's interesting about this is, so now it's not about the money. Of course, there was a second reading amendment that says it was all about the money, and if we paid them $50,000 a year for 5 years, the problem would go away. So I don't know if that's an accurate statement. But more importantly, now it's about the aquifer. And so really, UW is apparently threatening at least their thinking with the town of Laramie, that if they have these 2 wells, it's going to deplete the aquifer and impact their ability to provide water to city members. And I would respectfully submit that that is simply not accurate. And in point of fact, UW hired a hydrologist, submitted a professional report to the state engineer's office. The town of Laramie also hired a hydrologist and submitted those informations to the state engineer. So there were 2 different studies, plus the qualified experts at the state engineer's office who made the determination that these water wells would not interfere with the aquifer for the town of Laramie, or for anyone else for that matter. So those decisions have been made. And that's part of the rulemaking and adjudicatory process of the state engineer's office. So to argue or suggest that that didn't happen is contrary to the rules and the laws of the state of Wyoming. And so it's a misrepresentation of the facts if they assert that and in that direction. So what's really going on here? What this is, I mean, when we vote on this bill, what are we voting on? We're voting on, does the university or you or your neighbors who are adjacent to a city limits, can you be prohibited from using your water well because the city decides it might interfere with their aquifer? So they're not going to let you use your well. And if you have an existing well in the town of Laramie, now it has to be permitted and you have to provide a meter on it and let them know how much water you're using to make sure that you can only use the water that they think you should have that doesn't interfere with the aquifer. That's what we're talking about here. So if this was your ranch, how would you feel about it? I would respectfully submit that you'd feel just like the University of Wyoming does. And you would stand up and say, you don't have the right to dictate how I can use this water well that has been specifically appropriated for a certain amount of production to be used for irrigation purposes. And that's all this is about. And it's about money, and it's about the Laramie deciding they want to control the aquifer instead of the state engineer's office. So on and against the amendment.
Thank you, members. First time, Representative Hunt, for your first time on the amendment bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the amendment and against the bill. It said that at the end of the day that really all politics is local. And I think that's especially true in Wyoming, where we are such a small population that to one degree or another, we all kind of know each other. And so wherever we are in the state. And so this issue, to me, really brings that home. And I guess my question is so with this being the issue, why must we make that point of all politics being local so obvious at the state level? And so I'm concerned, and I'm not comfortable with delving into an issue that does not affect me directly in my community or in my district. And I'm not comfortable with the fact that, it's just been in the last several days that this recent issue has been brought to my attention. And now most of us in here, we get it for the last several years. We've dealt with that certain golf course in one way or another. We've appropriated money. They drilled a well. It was dry. We've been down that road. All right. So, but if this were a squabble in my community, I would not be comfortable with coming to the legislature with an answer to fix it, hoping that everyone from every other corner of the state could understand it at an intimate level that I would understand it if it were going on in my backyard. And I think it's safe to say that other than those who are from Laramie, and maybe some of the other members here who have been more involved in this than most of us have not fully seen or appreciated the backstory that goes with this. And I get it. We're involving a state institution, which is the university, and going forward, this potentially has implications in other parts of the state for other communities and situations that they're dealing with. I understand that. But speaking to this issue particularly and this bill, I'm just not comfortable with us as a statewide body trying to interject our opinion into what is a very local problem. And if they have to fight that out in the court, then they have to fight it out in the court. And if it takes them a couple more years to reach a solution, well, there's an avenue for doing that. But I'm just That's what it boils down to for me. It's not picking sides one way or the other on the issue in and of itself. It's the fact that it is a local issue. It is a local dispute. And I don't think that we, as the state legislature, as the state house, should be interjecting our frankly uneducated assessment into that fight. So on and against the bill for the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Sherwood, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just as a friendly reminder, the district I represent includes both the university and the city. So regardless of the direction this conversation goes, it impacts those that I serve. And I just wanted to share with the body that in a recent story in our local paper, this highlighted this issue and these concerns. And a lot of our residents were completely caught off guard. And so since then, since the weekend, I've received quite a few calls and emails of concerns from my constituents in regards to specifically the potential for rate increases if this bill goes through. And this overall feeling of it being unfair or unethical that the citizens of the Gem City would pay the price for this local conflict and this power struggle. So our constituents are caught in the middle of this very complex issue. They are asking that we vote no on this bill so that the city and the university can continue their negotiations to come to an agreement that hopefully and ideally saves both sides time, money, and heartache, would save the university money and prevent a rate increase that will impact faculty, staff, and students living in the community. And when we get down to this conversation about rights and water rights, certainly I'm not a lawyer on this issue, but my question to the body would be, do we want to limit local government's control and jurisdiction to protect the quality of our drinking water that impacts our constituents and us as individuals? I would ask for you to vote no on this. Thank you.
Representative Burkhart, Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, just a couple thoughts here. Frankly, we're not injecting ourselves into a local issue. The university is a state institution. The land on the university belongs to the state. And that the water in the state belongs to the state. Read the Constitution, it says so. It doesn't belong to a community or a county or a person. It belongs to the state, and there's a process to allocate that water and to use it. I want to give you some of the history of what's happened, kind of relative to water with the community. Some of you in here, probably not many, remember when the community came to the legislature and said, we can't afford the costs of water at the territorial park, help us. That occurred a number of years ago. The community also was involved in an extraterritorial dispute, which resulted in this body and the one down the hall changing state law on extraterritorial jurisdiction. They wanted to extend it 5 miles outside city limits, which would have controlled all those people who want to live in the county for various reasons, who have water wells and everything already. That was the reason for the change in the extraterritorial jurisdiction that they wanted. In fact, they wanted to control what you could do in your own driveway within that 5 miles. Whether you could wash your automobile, your truck or not, whether you could engage in a hobby that generated maybe wood dust. And that we have already been involved in these with this community constantly. And it seems like it's one of those communities that keeps coming up all the time into this body that we have to fix some issue that they've raised. So this isn't unusual. It's not something we don't deal with almost constantly. As for the golf course, years ago, that golf course, the grass was dying, it was going dead. And with no grass, there's no golf course, and thus the land becomes worthless almost, other than if you want to develop it, and then it becomes worth a lot of money. And I would tell you that I think the value of that golf course for development is considerable, although the golf course does belong to the state. I don't want to go into the reasons why, but it does. They came to us and said, UW said, we want to drill a well to water it. We elected to provide the money to do that. They drilled the well. It came in as a dry hole. Well, there went over $1 million. They came back and said, we want to drill another well. And some of you will remember probably one of the most unique amendments anybody's tried to put in the budget, which was mine, which said, if it comes back as a dry hole, you have to sell the golf course. I got tired of dealing with it. Let's take the direct approach. The water well came in, and it came in good water, good volume, and that, but it's not potable as we would normally consider it. I guess if you tested it, you might be able to drink it without any trouble. That's some of the background to this. The community in which I live has a golf course. A donor donated the land and pretty much built the golf course for the community. The community is using non-potable water to water that golf course so they don't have to use treated water. Good call. You know, I don't want treated water going to a golf course. I don't play golf. I don't have any dog in that fight, but I don't want good water, which is valuable to all of us in here and the state as a whole, going to make grass green when you don't really need it. So non-potable water is a good way to do that. They put a line in 8 miles long to provide that water. It was economical, and that way they don't have to provide potable water. This way, the university uses non-potable water directly on that land. They can use it for other things, flowers if you wish. And it makes that water usable. The water belongs to the state. And if you look at what this community is doing, this community is trying to tie up all of that land sitting between east of the community and here. They don't want any development on that land. They don't want people using it. It's a land grab as far as I'm concerned. And they can use water or any number of excuses they want. But that's what it is. It's the attempt of the city to exercise jurisdiction over state property, over state water, over the individuals that live there. They want to control what the people out in the county do. And this body said no before and changed the extraterritorial jurisdiction laws and said you have to work with the county if you want to do something. This is just another thing. It's just constant. So I don't have any problem saying I'm against the amendment, for the bill. We need to exercise our rights as a state and not give those rights over to a community, because it's just going to be another community, and pretty soon all of them are going to want their own actions, their own wells. You can't have state property in our community without doing a whole bunch of things. So on and for the bill, against the amendment. And I'd ask you to really think about this, because if you vote against the bill, you're actually giving up state sovereignty to a community, to a city council, over and above this body, the 5 people over and above the 90 that said here. So on and against the amendment, for the bill.
Well, hopefully we're on the back 9. Representative Ayer, first
Thank-
time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know it's lunchtime and I'm not going to take long. I'm just going to give you my local control speech again. This is a local issue, a local dispute, and the legislature should not be legislating this. And further, we should not be adjudicating a water dispute. We're not equipped to handle that, and we shouldn't be involved in that. So I'm in favor of the amendment, against the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Eklund.
I guess I would argue that the opposite. This is about water law, and it's established. We've got some of the best water law in the country. And because we have that, people's allocation rights are protected. It has been permitted by the state engineer where it should be, and then it has been permitted for the beneficial use as stated, and we can't have local governments interfering with that. They are contradicting state law, and that needs to probably be the focus on this whole thing. regardless of the squabbles, regardless of the use. I'm ready to put a different use to this golf course too, but we do have state law that is already taking care of this, and that is the water right that the state has issued to the university.
Thank you. Representative Larson, Dan.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Against the amendment for the bill, I think this is a property right issue. The university's paid a lot of money to get some wells drilled. They need to keep their golf course, green and such. And I just don't think the city should be able to control that. So vote against the amendment for the bill.
Members for their first time, Chairman Swanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a question, because if you look at your bill, and no one ever looks at this, but in the top upper right-hand corner, you'll see it says 21 LSO draft 85, which means this bill was asked for likely late last March, early last April. So I guess my question to the bringer, and it just occurred to me, the bringer of this bill has known this bill has been out there for 9 or 10 months and it was coming to session. And so I've read the history of both sides kind of over the last year of negotiations, breaking down and all of these talks. But it does seem really weird to me all of a sudden that I'm just guessing one side has known that this bill has been out there for 9 months, and that would prevent me from coming to the table. And I guess I just want some more explanation. And I know it's not his amendment. So sometime in the course of discussion, I guess I'd like a little more information. Really for 9 months now, knowing this bill was coming to session or being drafted for the potential of use, let's say, maybe they thought we didn't need it, but that doesn't, at least on face value, indicate that we've had a goodwill negotiation for the last 9 months if this has kind of been on the back pocket of one side for a while.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? Members for their first time, people going in 3 different directions.
First for a second, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative O'Hearn. First for a second, Representative Provenza.
First for a second, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else want to go a second time? Anybody else? Any other time? Anybody for their first time? For their first time. Going to second time before the sponsor. Second time. Representative O'Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Somebody mentioned dog in a fight earlier. We have $2.9 million in this fight. They've been discussing this for the last 14 years. They have not been able to come to terms. It's our constitutional right that if I drill a well on my property, I can use it any way I want. Against the amendment, for the bill.
Thank you. Representative Provenza, second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and for the amendment, against the bill. We keep talking about ranchers and their access to water. And so if this was your ranch and you couldn't get your water on your land, you would stand up and ask your legislator, if you were a constituent in our community, and say that you would want the law changed for you and your neighbors, not for you by name, not for you as a special interest. This is not a bill that is asking to fix this for us, for one person and my neighbors. This is a bill asking for special privileges with a specific name attached to it. And that's not how we do things here. And I hope that we don't do that here today. So on and against the bill. Thank you.
Any other member for their second time? Second time, Chairman Nicholas.
You say me? Okay.
Chairman Nicholas, please proceed.
I'm
Second
sorry,
time.
This ear is not working. So, ladies and gentlemen, what's interesting is this concept, or the assertion, particularly in the documents that were drafted up by the good folks from Laramie, about we can resolve this thing. We want to act in good faith and we want to resolve this thing. So these issues have been going on since before 2017, and they've been trying to resolve it since then. And as I explained earlier, the Attorney General was the mediator and with our good chief executive involved, and they were conducting mediation between the two parties last year. So what happened right in the middle of all these mediation discussions, when they're talking about whether or not who would get the water, where, and what accommodation the city would make to the UW? What did they do? Despite being in the middle of the mediations, they go out and on August, I think it's August 4th, they pass this ordinance. So basically they said, even during mediations, we're going to pass a law and we're going to do what we want because that's what we want. And we don't care about the mediation. So it was an absolute act of bad faith during the process of those mediations. And since then, they've been on a media campaign to paint themselves into the right corner. And it's just not the facts. It really isn't. So this bill may have been drafted back in last year. I don't really remember when it was drafted, but it just sat on the back shelf until that ordinance got passed. And at some point you have to say, well, if you're going to pass a law and you're going to play hardball and you're going to make it against the law for us to use our water on our land, then we're just going to have to go and evaluate whether or not that is the law is legal. So that's either a lawsuit or it's statutory. And it's protecting the sovereignty of the University of Wyoming. And it's protecting the water rights of water owners in this state. And we do this, ladies and gentlemen, every day. There's at least 5 or 10 bills this session that we've passed out that address this type of issue, where someone is overreaching and we say, wait a minute, let's step back. We want you to act lawfully and we want you to follow the laws of the state of Wyoming. This ordinance violates the laws of the state of Wyoming. And this is the easiest, most efficient way to address it. In addition to that, we've just cut $40 million from the university's budget through our budget cuts. They've been trying to save money by drilling water wells so they can irrigate their golf course. They'll save anywhere between $200,000 to $250,000 a year by having these operable. So they're trying to be good stewards of the land, use the water, and save money. Even after this happens, UW will still be paying over $1.5 million annually to the city of Laramie for their potable water. And so they're still acting good neighbors on that staff. They just want to use the water that they've drilled for and the hundreds of thousands of dollars they spent in the well and that they'll have to spend in their infrastructure to get their well water across their land to use on their property. So on and in favor and against the amendment and for the bill.
Thank you. Any other member for their second time before the sponsor, to the sponsor, Representative Gray.
So there's a lot to unpack here. Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry. There's a lot to unpack here. First of all, the feasibility study that was referenced earlier was for previous wells, not for this new deeper well. The state engineer approval was granted as a matter of course pursuant to Wyoming statute. An interference study has not been conducted. Now, if this goes through, I'm sure they're gonna request an interference study pursuant to 41.3.911B. I want to talk a little bit about the private property rights line that was used. I am very pro private property rights, but I also believe that when we use language, it should be appropriate to the situation at hand. We're talking about within city limits, This is not a ranch situation. This is within city limits where you have a Wyoming Supreme Court precedent saying that the city has a fiduciary duty to protect its citizens' water, their supply, a fiduciary duty. And that's a Supreme Court decision. So we know that's in line with the state sovereignty sections in water in the Wyoming State Constitution and not inconsistent with that. So it's a different situation. And I would pose to you that there are 4 municipalities, at least in the state of Wyoming, that already have this ordinance. If this ordinance is a violation of the Wyoming State Constitution, well, then let's get it off the books through the court process, not intervene for one entity to prevent it from going to court, because you know they have the money to do it. But if this ordinance is indeed unconstitutional, then it should go through a court system. And I'd pose to you, there are multiple communities that have it. I guess the citizenry doesn't have the ability to go to court. Maybe UW has the ability to do this and we can resolve this issue. But it hasn't been resolved. There are multiple communities with this ordinance already because of that precedent that the city has the fiduciary duty to protect its water wells. I mean, it's water, the citizens' water. These 2 new wells are in the potable aquifer. And if they want non-potable water, they should drill into a shallower aquifer. I want to talk a little bit too about this mediation. The mediation, it wasn't really a mediation, what they're labeling. It was a meeting in October that there was really no back and forth on. They'd already made up their minds. Probably because, again, I'm not getting in their minds, but they probably know this bill exists, number 85. It's been there for a year and a half. And the ordinance was in August. The supposed mediation was after the ordinance, not during it. I want to bring your attention now to this letter dated November 5th, 2020. And here they provide 6 options. And they say over and over again that they are willing to provide free non-potable water, which frankly, I think this is why sometimes the municipalities frustrate me. This is way too generous. Option 2, sentence 2, no ongoing payments to the water utility for consumption of irrigation at Jacoby. Option 3, no ongoing payments to the water utility for consumption of irrigation at Jacoby. Option 4, no ongoing payments to the municipal utility for consumption of irrigation water at Jacoby. They offer it multiple times. Free non-potable water, free. And yet the university still doesn't want to even go into a mediation because that was not what occurred. Folks, this is a stubbornness, okay? And we cannot allow it to continue. We can't build a carve out every single time. They've been offered free non-potable water. Why on earth would they not move forward with that? Please vote no on the bill. I respectfully withdraw 3rd reading amendment number 3 to House Bill 192.
Thank you. House Bill 198, having been read 3 separate times. The question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago excused. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flitner. Fortner. Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Kenner. Knapp, Larson Lloyd, Larson Dan, McGuire, Martinez, Nyman, Newsom, Nicholas, Oakley, Obermuller, O'Hearn, Olson, Ottman, Paxton, Provenza, Roscoe, Schwartz, Sherwood, Simpson, Summers, Stith, Stivar, Sweeney, Walters, Washit, Western, Worf, Williams, Wilson, Winter, Yin, Zawanitzer, Mr. Speaker, Blackburn. Closing vote, are there any changes? Clausen, aye to no. Fortner, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 32 aye, 27 no, 1 excused.
House Bill 198, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 198 has passed the House. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House stand in recess until 2:30 PM.
So thank you, Mr. Majority. Committee announcements, committee announcements. Chairman Zoop. Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 8, Transportation, will meet in 15 minutes to consider Senate File 4, Senate File 7, and Senate File 107.
Thank you, Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, your joint conference committee will meet on recess to have the budget of the respective houses explained. On adjournment, your House Appropriations Committee will continue with Senate File 6 and Senate File 71, any referrals, and continuation of Senate File 2.
Thank you, Chairman Olson.
Thank you. Your House Judiciary Committee will meet here upon adjournment to consider Senate File 39, Digital Identity, and Senate File 19, Public Health Emergencies, Immunity Amendments.
Thank you. Any other announcements? Chairman Wilson, did you have a referral you wanted to do? Nope. All right. Further announcements, seeing none. The House will stand in recess until 2:30.